Today I'm going to be making a card using the Baroque Motif stamp set from Stampin' Up. This is one that I was talking about in the general stamping video, and there are lots of flourish stamps. This particular one from Stampin' Up is just one example. There are many, many different stamps that come with these kind of flourish designs. So this particular idea would work with a lot of different ones. Now, this one also comes as part of the set with some other smaller images that you can use along with it, so I'm going to use one of those. I have a greeting that came from a different Stampin' Up set, a real small greeting that I needed for this. The inks that I'm going to be working with, I'm going to be using Versamark that we talked about also in the beginning stamping videos on the ink side, and I'm going to be using a distress ink that happens to match the purple color scheme that I have here. So, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to be doing is some embossing, and I mentioned embossing briefly, just in passing, in the other videos. With embossing, you're stamping with the, actually I showed you I think some examples, where you're stamping with the Versamark ink and then you're applying an embossing powder and heating it. To do embossing, you need a clear ink or some kind of ink that stays wet. You can actually use a colored ink if you want to and emboss over it, because the embossing powder will turn it to whatever color you want it to be. But most people use some kind of clear ink like the Versamark. Ranger makes an ink that does this. There are other options as well. And of course you'll need some embossing powder. I get most of mine from Stampin' Up. I like the real fine texture of their embossing powder. Other folks do that as well. I have some here from American Crafts. This particular one from American Crafts happens to be a little bit coarser. They make some really pretty things, especially at Christmas. We're going to use the Stampin' Up one today. When I use an embossing powder a lot, I keep it in a clear plastic tub, in its own tub, so I don't have to keep pouring it back into the excess back into the container. When you're doing embossing, you want to apply something over the surface that will keep the embossing powder from sticking to areas that you don't want it to stick to. You only want it to stick to the ink. And you can use a dryer sheet for this, or you can use something called the Embossing Buddy, which is just a little bag with some talcum powder in it. Alright, so I'm going to do that. And then when I'm working with a really large stamp like this, I typically turn the stamp over. See, this is a well-used one. And apply my ink this way. And you can tilt the stamp when you're working with these clear inks and see that it's all inked up. It's catching the light. So I know I've got ink on there. And I'm going to take that and apply it to the middle of this darker purple cardstock. This happens to be Perfect Plum from Stampin' Up. This is going to be a monochromatic card, so you could use any colors that you wanted to. Okay. Now that'll stay damp for a few minutes, and it will give me some time to add the greeting, because I would also like to emboss it as well. Okay. Now, with those stamped in the Versamark, I'm now ready to add my embossing powder. Sprinkle that over. You can go over it as many times as you need to. When you get all the embossing powder added, you want to turn the cardstock over and flick it with your fingers so that you get off any excess. And occasionally there'll be excess will stick somewhere where it's not supposed to. I don't see any on this card. If it does, I usually take my fingernail, or you can take a paintbrush and get the remainder off. Okay? Now, this can sit kind of as long as you want to. As long as you don't rub it or anything, it's just going to sit there until you're ready to heat it up. Once it starts melting into the paper, you just move the embossing tool across the paper Make sure you don't burn yourself. You can use tweezers to hold the paper if you need to. Just keep your fingers out of the way. And I love the effects of gold and silver. I think they're really beautiful. Do a little bit on the reverse side too, and that'll help it to lay flat when you're finished. Alright, so now we have a really pretty design. It's not quite tone on tone because we have the gold on the purple, but I am going to add a little bit of a tone on tone effect because I would like to do a little bit more with this stamp. I have quite a bit of area here that's not really being covered. I had originally cut this to be just a tad smaller than the size of my card, so I've still got some space to work with there. And what I think I will do is add a watermark type of effect, because the other thing you can do with Versamark powder or Versamark ink is to add just stamp it and then not do anything else to it, but just adding the stamping, and it will create a slightly darker color so it looks like a watermark. So I'm going to do that in a couple of places here. Add a little bit of ink to my stamp. Okay. And I think that's probably enough. That makes a beautiful effect by itself, just to do that. Now the Versamark, again, it stays wet for a little while, so I'm not going to mess with that too much. I'm just going to let that dry. I could take my heat tool and help it along by heating it up as well. But I've got other things to do, so I'm just going to set that aside. I have a scrap piece of a lighter color lavender cardstock. Take that distress ink, which you can stamp with, and stamp a smaller image. Okay. Right. And now I'll take my scissors and cut this out. Run just a little bit of purple around the edges. Okay. And now I'm going to apply this to the middle of my image, and I would like to use a brad. Got a pretty gold brad that I'm going to put in the center of this. And the way I do brads, I can use a hole punch for that. What I use a lot of times is a foam pad and a piercing tool. And what I use for a paper piercing tool is actually a dressmaker's awl. These are used for covering buttons and all kinds of things. You can get these at the fabric stores. I've had this one a long time. I assume you can get them, still get them at the fabric stores. They're similar to a carpenter's awl, which is used for making holes in walls and things, but this is much smaller. What I like about it is you can make a tiny hole, or you can push it further in and make a much larger hole, whatever you need to do. I'm going to go ahead and fold that brad down, and then I'm going to attach this with dimensionals so that it will pop up a little bit. Now, the last thing I'm going to put on the front of this card is one of my favorite things that I get from the jewelry department at Hobby Lobby. And I thought this color was gone. I was really tickled to find this color the last time that I was there. This is called Stone Smoke Topaz, that's what it's called. It only comes in the one size, or that's all they carry at Hobby Lobby, and they may have these at the other craft stores as well. You can get them in clear in a couple of different sizes, and I find them cheaper to get them there than to get them in the scrapbooking department. They don't have adhesive on the back though, so you do have to add some glue dots. So I can take my glue dot, and what I'm going to do with these is just add a few to where these flourishes circle around. Oh, didn't pick up glue. Not a lot of them. These come in other colors besides gold and clear. It's just the two colors that I have really enjoyed using. Okay. Alright. Now, I'll glue that to the front of the card, and it'll be all ready to send out. So, we've used the flourish stamp and embossed it, added some jewels to it. You could also put flowers here. You could do lots of different things with these. The flourish stamps are just incredibly versatile. So we've also seen how to do some watermarking and then work in some of the other designs that came with this set. Okay. I decided to add a little gold ribbon to the top of this to finish it off. And that's our card for today. Check out my blog for some other cards that use the Baroque Motifs set, this flourish stamp, and give you some ideas for some other cards with flourish stamps. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.